So as we mentioned before, we can solve these quadratic equations by factoring, because factoring essentially gives us the zeros of the quadratic. So basically what we can, the idea behind solving by factoring is we're using an important property here called the zero property of multiplication, meaning that if we have multiplication of two factors, or not just two factors, but of any factors, if the factors equal 0, then that means that either the A must be equal to 0 or the B must be equal to 0. And they can be equal to 0 and the other one not 0 and still give us a product of 0. So in this case here, if I have the factor x plus 3 times x minus 2, okay, this x plus 3 could be equal to 0, which means that x could be equal to negative 3. Okay, when that factor's x is equal to negative 3, that factor is equal to 0. Although this is going to be equal to negative 5 times 0 is still going to be equal to 0. The other x that can make this equation work is when this is equal to 0. So when x is equal to 2, now we have a 0 here. And although this is positive 5 times 0 is still 0. But they both give us solutions. So x equals negative 3 and x equals positive 2 are solutions to this equation. And again, because the parabola has this shape, it's going to give us, we should expect that there's going to be two solutions. So that's how factors can be used to solve quadratics. So if we factor this here, two numbers that multiply to 20 and add to negative 12 are going to be negative 10, negative 2. This is equal to 0. And again, it's important that it's equal to 0 because now if it's equal to 0, we can use the zero property of multiplication. So I can say that looking at this factor, x could be equal to 10. If I look at the other factor, so first of all, if x is equal to 10, this is going to be equal to 8. But again, 0 times 0 times 8 is still equal to 0. So 10 is a solution. Here, if I have x equals 2, that's going to give me a 0 here. So negative 8 times 0 is still equal to 0. Again, since the factored form and the general form are the same, it doesn't matter. I can plug 2 into here and get 4 minus 24 is negative 20 plus 20 is equal to 0. It will work, whether it's in factored form or the general form. So basically, what we want to do is we want to be able to, as long as we can make it equal to 0 and then factor, and it's important, it has to be equal to 0 for this to work. So if I take a look at this equation here, I want to make this equation equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I'm going to end up with equaling 0. So that's key. It has to be equal to 0, but once it's equal to 0, if I factor this, negative 3 times negative 1, now the x's that solve this solution are much more easily found because I can now just look at these two these are called linear parts. This is a quadratic. These are linear parts because these are degree 1, degree 1. So they are what we call linear parts of that quadratic. So I can just look at the linear parts independently of each other. So x can be equal to 3. And again, it doesn't matter what's going to happen here when I plug 3 in, because anything times 0 is equal to 0. Here, x could be equal to positive 1. And again, I look at that independently of the other bracket because regardless of what's happening in the other bracket, this is equal to 0, which makes the equation equal to 0. So there's my two solutions.